The man who didn't belong. The lecture hall was cold, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence. Over 300 students filled the seats, eyes fixed forward, notebooks open, ready for what many called the most difficult class in the university, theoretical physics 401. Only a few brave enough, or brilliant enough, ever made it to this level. But today, something was different. At the far back, alone in a corner seat, sat a man no one expected to see in a room like this. His dark, humble clothes made him invisible at first glance. His hair, slightly tousled, looked like he had walked through a storm, and when students looked twice, their mouths parted slightly in disbelief. It was Keanu Reeves. Some stared in silence. Others whispered. A few pulled out their phones, trying to snap a discreet picture. He didn't flinch, didn't speak. He just sat there quietly, a worn notebook in hand, a pen held tightly between his fingers. As whispers grew louder, a few students chuckled. "What's Neo doing in a physics class?" one boy said to his friend. "Maybe he thinks he's in the Matrix again," another joked. Keanu heard it, but he didn't look up. Instead, he wrote something softly on his page, the pen barely making a sound. The heavy doors opened, and a sharp clicking of shoes echoed through the hall. Everyone sat straight. The students knew the sound well. Professor Kroll had arrived. Professor Elias Kroll was a legend at the university. A man feared more than admired. He was brilliant, yes, but also cold, proud, and ruthless. His lectures were like battles. Every question was a test. Every mistake, a scar. He walked to the front, adjusted his coat, and turned slowly to face the class. His eyes scanned the room like a hawk. Then they stopped. He squinted, leaned forward a little, and frowned. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice loud and full of disbelief. Keanu looked up gently. "Yes, sir." A few chuckles erupted from the back. Professor Kroll raised his hand to silence them. "I wasn't aware the theater department had joined us," the professor said, half smiling. "Or is this a field trip?" Keanu shook his head. "No, sir. I'm here to learn." The professor walked closer, his shoes clicking. "Louder now." "Learn?" he repeated. "What exactly do you plan to learn here, Mr. Reeves? Quantum field theory? Black hole thermodynamics? Or maybe you just want inspiration for your next role?" More laughter now. Even a few of the shy students smirked. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, "I've always loved physics. I thought I'd try." The professor crossed his arms. "Try?" he said sharply. "This class isn't about trying. It's about surviving. The minds in this room were built for science. This isn't a movie set. There are no scripts to memorize, no cameras to flatter your mistakes." The hall grew colder. "But you're welcome to stay," the professor added with a sharp grin. "We always need an example of what not to do." Keanu nodded once and went back to writing. The class began. Numbers filled the board. Strange symbols, integrals, limits, tenses, and proofs. Some students scribbled furiously, already behind. Others stared blankly, lost before the first 20 minutes passed. But Keanu wrote calmly, slowly, as if he was understanding, not copying. Nobody noticed. After class, students flooded the hallway. Some laughed. Some argued about the equations. Keanu stayed behind, still writing, his brow furrowed. Professor Kroll walked by him, slowing down for a moment. "I suggest you consider auditing a different course, Mr. Reeves," he said. "Perhaps something simpler, like philosophy." Keanu looked up, and there was something in his eyes. Not anger, not pain, but depth. Something old, something quiet. "Thank you, Professor," he said. And then he added something strange. "Your fourth equation today was wrong." The professor stopped. "Excuse me?" Keanu flipped his notebook around. He pointed to a small part of the equation written earlier on the board. "You switch the sign here," he said. It reversed the boundary condition. The entire solution breaks down after that. The professor stared. His eyes narrowed. Then he snatched the notebook, stared at it, and froze. Keanu was right. No one had noticed. Not even the top students. But Keanu had. Professor Kroll handed the notebook back slowly, expression unreadable. "We'll see if you survive the next class," he said quietly. Keanu nodded. "I'll be here." As the professor left, his steps slower now, one student had watched the whole thing from the stairs. She wasn't laughing anymore. Her name was Layla, top of the class, daughter of 2 scientists, proud, smart, and focused. She had laughed too at first, but something in Keanu's silence had shaken her, and now she wondered, who was this man? The question that no one dared to ask. The next lecture came sooner than expected. As the sun lit up the wide halls of the university, the cold marble floor echoed with footsteps, some rushing, some dragging. Most students walked in 2s or groups, chatting, tired, carrying books. But one man, as always, walked alone. Keanu Reeves entered the building without a sound. Same dark clothes, same old notebook, same look in his eyes, calm but not empty, quiet but full of something deeper. The class filled quickly today. Word had spread. Some didn't believe it. Others said it was a rumor. But those who had stayed behind last time knew what they saw. Keanu had corrected Professor Kroll, not with attitude, not with arrogance, but with precision. No drama, no applause. Just truth. Still, most students expected him to disappear after that. He didn't. He came back. Early. And he sat in the same seat. This time, Layla sat closer. Not beside him, not yet, but 3 rows down, just close enough to observe her. Eyes moved between him and the board as if comparing them, trying to solve a different kind of equation. The lecture began. Professor Kroll walked in with even sharper steps than before. He looked rested, focused. He adjusted his tie, placed a thick stack of notes on the table, and turned to the class. But he didn't look at Keanu this time. Instead, he said, "Before we begin, does anyone have any questions from last time?" Silence. No. One raised a hand. Most students feared asking questions in this class. It often ended with embarrassment or another 20-minute explanation that went over everyone's heads. But then a voice spoke up. It was deep, low, clear. "I have one," Keanu said. Half the class turned. Layla leaned forward slightly. "Professor." Kroll looked up slowly, not smiling. "Yes, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu stood. "In your first proof," he said softly, "you applied the Noether theorem to a non-conserved current. But the symmetry is broken in the Lagrangian." The words were heavy. Not the kind an actor would memorize for a film. Not the kind someone would throw out for attention. They were precise. Professor Kroll tilted his head. He walked to the board, took a marker, and without a word, wrote the equations Keanu referred to. His hand moved quickly, and then he stopped. The line Keanu had pointed out. It was there. And it was true. The professor stood silently for a moment, marker still in hand. "Most students don't notice that until graduate school," he said without turning. Keanu didn't respond. He just waited. Professor Kroll erased the board slowly. "Well then, let's go deeper." What followed was not a regular lecture. Instead of speaking to the class, Professor Kroll began writing at a speed no one could follow. The room became silent again, not from fear this time, but from awe. It was like watching a battle of minds between 2 quiet warriors. One wrote, the other listened. And Layla, she wrote both. Keanu's notebook stayed open the entire time. He filled every line, not copying blindly, but breaking things down. Sometimes he paused, closed his eyes, and then nodded softly to himself before continuing. Halfway through, the professor turned suddenly. Mr. Reeves. Derive the Hamiltonian. Everyone froze. Keanu looked up. For which system? The professor smiled tightly. For this one, he said, writing out a complicated structure involving spin, curvature, and time symmetry. Keanu stood, walked slowly to the board. He picked up the marker. For the first few seconds, he didn't move. He simply stared at the board as if seeing past it. The room held its breath. Then, he began. First line, clean. Second line, clear. Third line, elegant. Even the students who didn't fully understand the math could feel it, the way he moved, the way he wrote. It was like music. Layla blinked, watching his fingers, watching the calm in his eyes. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about being right. It was about understanding, and he understood deeply. When he finished, he handed the marker back and walked to his seat. Professor Kroll stared at the board, said nothing. The answer was perfect. Class dismissed, the professor finally said. As chairs scraped and students moved toward the door, Layla stayed behind. She walked slowly toward the man who now seemed like a puzzle with a missing center. Why are you here? She asked softly. Keanu looked up. To learn, he said. Same calm voice. No, she said, gently shaking her head. You already know this stuff better than anyone here. Even Professor Kroll. Keanu looked at his notebook. Then he said, something she didn't expect. I knew the math, he whispered, but I forgot the wonder. I came back to find it. Her breath caught. This wasn't about ego. This wasn't about showing off. This was about rediscovery. Keanu stood to leave, but she stopped him. You were right about the Noether theorem, she said. I missed it too, but not next time. For the first time since he entered the university, Keanu smiled. Not for show, not because someone praised him, just because someone understood. As he left the room, Layla stood frozen for a moment, watching the door, thinking one thought she couldn't shake. What else is he hiding? The secret inside the notebook. 3 days passed, and something had shifted. The lecture hall still held the same cold air, the same hum of whispers before the class began. But this time, there was no mocking laughter when Keanu walked in. He entered, as always, quiet, simple, almost invisible. But today, students moved their bags to give him space. Not too close, not with fanfare, just respectful. Layla was already seated, second row this time. When Keanu passed her, she gave a soft nod. He returned it. Professor Kroll arrived 5 minutes late. That was rare. His tie was slightly loose, his expression unreadable. He didn't storm in like usual. Instead, he placed his books down slowly, took a deep breath, and looked around the room. Today, he said, we are going to deal with problems that cannot be solved by formulas alone. A few students looked up from their notes, confused. He began scribbling equations on the board, but they weren't typical. They involved unknown variables, unstable systems, theoretical chaos. Even the best students furrowed their brows. Then came the real challenge. Whoever solves this, Professor Kroll said, tapping the final line of the problem with the back of his pen, earns 10 extra credit points. But let me be clear. In 23 years, no one has solved this. He stepped back. The room froze. Keanu leaned forward, eyes on the board. He didn't move his hands, didn't write. Instead, he stared, then, slowly, reached into his bag, pulled out his notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and began to write. His pen moved slowly at first, then faster still. Students began to notice. Layla glanced behind her. Her eyes widened. Within minutes, a small group had turned around to watch him. But Keanu didn't lift his head. He was in his own world, one where numbers breathed and symbols whispered secrets. 30 minutes passed, and then he stopped. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't speak. He simply tore the page from his notebook, walked quietly to the front, and placed it on Professor Kroll's desk. The professor didn't react at first. He waited until Keanu returned to his seat. Then, as the rest of the class worked through the tangled mess of numbers, Professor Kroll scanned the page. His eyebrows twitched. His eyes narrowed. And then he did something nobody had ever seen him. He sat down. He read the page again, and again. Then he looked up at Keanu and said only one word. How? Keanu didn't answer. Layla raised her hand. Professor, she said, voice hesitant. What did he do? Professor Kroll didn't reply. He stood, walked slowly to the board, and rewrote Keanu's final step, line by line. Each move solved. A piece of the puzzle like a master chess player predicting 20 moves ahead. Students leaned in, gasps, whispers. When the full equation stood complete on the board, Layla whispered without thinking. That's beautiful. Professor Kroll turned to face them. It is, he said softly. And I didn't see it. The room was silent. Then Kroll added almost reluctantly. This is a general solution, not just to the problem, but to the class of problems. It rewrites how we've understood symmetry collapse. Keanu looked down, as if uncomfortable with the praise. After class, the crowd parted for him as he walked toward the exit. But Layla followed. You wrote something else in that notebook, she said, catching up to him. He glanced at her. What do you mean? Before you started the problem, she explained, you closed your eyes, and then you wrote one sentence before any numbers. I saw it. Keanu stopped. He didn't answer. What did it say? She asked softly. He handed her the notebook. Flip to the page. Above the solution, in small, clear handwriting, was a sentence. Remember why it matters. Layla held the notebook, frozen. The words echoed louder than any formula. They weren't about physics. They were about purpose. She looked at him. You're not just solving problems. You're searching for something. Keanu nodded. I'm trying to remember who I was, before the noise, before the lights. Layla closed the notebook gently and handed it back. Then let me help you remember, she said. It wasn't a flirt. It wasn't a favor. It was an offering of friendship, one born from truth, not fame. Keanu smiled again, just for a moment, but neither of them noticed that behind the tall columns of the hallway, someone else had been watching. Professor Kroll. He wasn't smiling. He was holding a letter in his hand, unopened. Sent to him from a European Physics Institute. On the front, the letter was marked, Urgent. Reeves anomaly and the return address, a research facility that no longer existed. The file they tried to bury the next morning, Professor Kroll sat alone in his office. The lights were dim, the window blinds half closed. On his desk lay an envelope, now opened. Its contents spread out like puzzle pieces of a truth he hadn't wanted to believe. He read the documents again, slowly. One name appeared across every page. Not Keanu Reeves, the actor, but Keanu Charles Reeves, classified observer ID R31. A name attached not to films, but to experiments. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped to the last page. Status: decommissioned facility. Project terminated. Subject disappeared. The ink was smudged on some lines, but one detail stood out. Project Eulora. Theoretical cognition experiments. Multi-dimensional math processing. They hadn't studied him. They had studied with him. Kroll leaned back in his chair, suddenly overwhelmed. The quiet man he mocked was once considered for a secretive program. Even he had been denied access to. A knock on the door broke the silence. Come in, he said, voice low. It was Layla. Professor, she said carefully, may I ask you something? He nodded, eyes still on the page. Do you know who he really is? Kroll looked up slowly. Do you? She hesitated, then shook her head. But I want to. The professor pushed the letter into a drawer, locking it. "Follow him," he said suddenly. "Watch him closely. Ask him questions he doesn't want to answer. Find out what he's doing here." "Why?" Layla asked. "Because," Kroll said, "there's more to him than you know. And if we don't understand it, we might be standing next to something far beyond our limits." Meanwhile, Keanu was not in class that day. He had taken a train to a forgotten part of the city, far from students, far from cameras. He walked through old streets filled with rust and silence. Eventually, he arrived at a locked gate, behind which stood a crumbling building once called Halberd Institute of Advanced Cognition. Abandoned, boarded up, but not empty in his mind. He climbed the gate, as if he had done it before. His steps didn't hesitate. Inside, broken machines lay in shadows, cables curled like dried vines. A large metal door, dented and half open, led to a deep hallway filled with dust. He stopped in front of a metal chair bolted to the floor. Wires still hung from the ceiling. A screen cracked down the center flickered faintly. This was the place. This was where they tested his brain. Not with numbers, but with questions no human was meant to answer. He sat down slowly in the chair, closed his eyes. Memories rushed back like a storm. A woman's voice, soft, asking him how he solved things he never studied. A machine measuring his brain as he looked at patterns no computer could process. They never gave him answers, only more problems, more weight. He had walked away before they finished, and they buried the project. But the questions stayed inside him. His phone buzzed. A message. From Layla. "Where are you? You missed class." Professor Kroll looked different today. Keanu stared at the message for a long time, then typed 2 words, not running, but he didn't send it. Instead, he walked deeper into the dark corridor until he reached a wall. He ran his hand across the bricks, searching, until he found it. A loose one. He pulled it out. Inside was a small metal drive, the last piece of his file. Elsewhere, back on campus, Layla sat in the library surrounded by physics journals. She wasn't reading them. She was watching a video, grainy, old, black and white. It showed a younger Keanu, strapped to a chair, answering unsolvable math equations in seconds. Around him stood scientists, clapping, gasping, writing notes in panic. The video ended. She looked up, her hands shaking. "What are you?" she whispered. That night, Keanu returned to the university and waited by the fountain outside the science hall. Layla found him there, her breath sharp from running. "You lied," she said. "You're not just some actor who loves physics." He didn't deny it. "I didn't lie," he replied. "I just didn't tell you everything. You were part of something dangerous." He nodded. They called it research. But it was more like searching for a god inside a man. And did they find it? Keanu looked up at the stars. They found someone who saw too much, someone who solved too fast, and it scared them. Layla stepped closer. "Does Professor Kroll know?" "He suspects," Keanu said quietly. "But he doesn't know what I came back for." "And what is that?" He turned to her. "To forget the genius and remember the man." For a long time, Layla said nothing. Then she handed him a small folded paper. "You need to read this," she said. It was on Professor Kroll's desk. Keanu unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words, then stopped, then widened. The letter wasn't about him. It was a warning. They're watching again. Project Eulora is not dead. They're rebuilding it, and they want you back. The genius who refused to be controlled. The city was quiet at 3 a.m., but Keanu wasn't sleeping. He stood alone on the rooftop of his apartment, the wind tugging at his coat. In one hand, he held the paper Layla had given him. In the other, The metal drive he'd pulled from behind the wall at the old Halberd Institute. His mind raced, not with panic, but with clarity. For years, he had lived quietly, away from questions, away from tests. He had chosen a life filled with stories, films, roles that let him be someone else, not because he loved the spotlight, but because it gave him a place to hide. But now, the world he walked away from was calling him back. They're rebuilding Project Eulora. Those words circled his thoughts like shadows. Keanu looked down at the drive. It held everything: formulas, models, simulations, data from his final tests, the pieces of his mind that they once tried to weaponize, the knowledge no one else had, the key to unlocking not just theoretical physics, but systems that could reshape the world. But in the wrong hands, it wouldn't just change the world, it would destroy it. By morning, he made a choice. When Keanu walked into Professor Kroll's office that day, he didn't knock. He didn't wait. He placed the metal drive on the professor's desk without a word. Kroll looked up, startled. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Keanu asked. Kroll's lips tightened. "The letter?" "Yes." "It's real," Keanu said. "Project Eulora never died. It just went deeper underground." Professor Kroll picked up the drive slowly, holding it like it was radioactive. "This is the original data," he whispered. "From the tests, from the simulations you ran at Halberd." Keanu nodded. "You could have destroyed this," Kroll said. "Why didn't you?" Keanu's voice was calm. "Because there's something buried inside it, something even I don't understand. But someone else will try to unlock it, without me." Professor Kroll leaned forward. "Then why bring it?" "Here? Because I want you to keep it," Keanu said. "Lock it, hide it, protect it." Kroll looked stunned. "After all I said to you, after how I treated you," Keanu smiled faintly. "This isn't about pride, it's about trust." There was a pause, heavy, filled with 100 unspoken truths. Then Keanu turned to leave, but Kroll stood. "Wait," he said. "If this data gets into the wrong hands, what happens?" Keanu didn't look back. "It won't just be a theory anymore. It'll be reality, and we're not ready for it." Across the city, in a steel-gray building hidden behind an abandoned tech park, men in suits stared at multiple screens. Surveillance footage played in silence. Keanu walking, Keanu thinking, Keanu talking to Kroll. A voice spoke from the corner. "He's unstable. He turned his back on us once. We can't let him run loose again." Another voice answered. "He's not running." The screen froze on Keanu's face. "He's preparing." Back at campus, Layla waited near the physics lab. Her eyes flicked to the clock. Keanu was late, but then footsteps echoed behind her. Turned and froze. It wasn't Keanu. It was a man in black, clean-cut, emotionless. "Miss Layla Chaudhry?" he asked, holding up a badge. She nodded slowly. "Yes?" "We'd like to ask you a few questions. About Mr. Reeves." "Who are you?" she asked, backing away slightly. "Friends," the man said with a cold smile. "Of the project." Before she could run, a black van pulled up at the curb. Doors opened. 2 more men stepped out. Layla's heart pounded, but before they reached her, a voice boomed through the hallway. "Let her go." It was Keanu. He walked toward them with slow, steady steps. No panic. No fear. "This doesn't concern you," one of the men warned. "It concerns me the moment you touch someone who still believes in learning," Keanu replied. "You gave us the drive," the man said. "But it's not enough. We need you." Keanu shook his head. "You had me once. You broke me into pieces and called it science. And now we need those pieces again," the man growled. "You owe us." Keanu's eyes darkened. "I owe no one the right to control my mind. The men moved forward. But before they could act, campus security appeared. Students, professors, others who had followed the noise. And Layla stepped forward, holding up her phone. "This entire conversation," she said, "is now live streaming." The men froze. The van doors shut. The strangers backed off. "We'll be watching, Mr. Reeves," one said before disappearing. As silence fell, Keanu looked at Layla. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "Neither should you," she replied. "You were going to fight alone again." He looked down. "I didn't want anyone else to carry my burden." "Then let us carry you instead," she said. Later that night, Professor Kroll sat in his office again, staring at the metal drive. He didn't destroy it. He didn't open it either. He placed it in a lead-locked safe, buried deep in the university's restricted lab, and as he closed the door, he muttered, "Sometimes, the greatest minds are the ones brave enough to walk away from greatness." Meanwhile, Keanu walked under the night sky again, not hiding this time, but breathing. He had been studied, hunted, feared, but not understood. Now finally, he was being seen, not as a genius, but as a man. The genius who walked away from glory morning came with a strange calm. The sky over the university was painted in soft gray, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Students moved across the courtyard with a new kind of quiet respect. Whispers about Keanu Reeves no longer carried jokes or disbelief. Now they carried questions, deep ones. Who was he really? Why had he returned? What had they almost missed? Inside the physics building, Professor Kroll stood at the podium in an empty lecture hall, staring at the rows of seats. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about equations or breakthroughs. He was thinking about regret. When Keanu first stepped into his class, Kroll had seen only an outsider, a celebrity, a joke. But now, he knew the truth. Keanu wasn't trying to prove anything. He was trying to let go of something that had once defined him too deeply. And maybe he was trying to help someone else do the same. Kroll turned away from the podium and walked to his desk, where a sealed letter lay waiting. It was addressed not to any institute or authority, but to Keanu. He had written it the night before, not with formulas, but with honesty. Meanwhile, Keanu stood beside the lake on the far end of campus. Layla sat beside him, legs crossed, notebook on her lap. They hadn't spoken much since the encounter with the men in black. Silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Layla asked finally. Keanu didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the still water where a single bird floated alone, cutting a path through the fog. "I have to," he said softly. "I've done what I came to do." "Which was what?" Layla asked, her voice breaking slightly. Keanu turned to her. "To remember who I am without them. To prove to myself that I can still think without being owned." Layla looked down. "But you could stay," she said. "You could teach, help others, rewrite how we see science." Keanu smiled. "But then it becomes another cage." "So that's it?" she whispered. "You vanish again?" Keanu reached into his bag and pulled out a small book, his old notebook, filled with pages of numbers, ideas, sketches, and a single sentence. On the first page, "Remember why it matters." He handed it to her. "This is yours now," he said. Layla's eyes widened. "Keanu, this could be dangerous," he interrupted. "Only if you let it be. But if you use it the right way, if you ask the right questions, it could become something beautiful." She clutched the notebook tightly, blinking back tears. "Why me?" she whispered. Keanu smiled again, gently. "Because you listened, not just to the answers, but to the silence between them." That afternoon, Keanu entered Professor Kroll's Office one last time. They sat across from each other, no words exchanged for a full minute. Finally, Kroll slid the sealed envelope across the desk. "For when you're ready," he said. "Not to read, just to remember." Keanu nodded. "Thank you." "No," Kroll said. "Thank you. You reminded me that a mind isn't just measured by what it solves, but by what it walks away from." Keanu stood to leave, but paused. At the door. "I once hated you," he said. Kroll raised an eyebrow. "I know," he replied, "and I deserved it." Keanu smiled, then left. At the edge of the city, far from buildings and textbooks, Keanu walked through the open fields alone. He had nothing in his hands, no bags, no drive, no files, just a quiet peace. Like a weight had finally fallen off his shoulders. Behind him, the world of equations and cold labs began to fade. Ahead of him, a path, not yet written. Lila stood on the rooftop later that evening, holding the notebook. She had flipped through every page and finally reached the last one. It was blank, but in the corner, in the smallest writing, Keanu had added a final line. "Now it's your turn to wonder." Weeks passed. The mysterious men didn't return. Project Eulora didn't resurface. But in the world of physics, whispers began of a new approach to solving unsolved systems. A theory so elegant it felt like poetry. It had no name, no author, only initials.care. Back at the university, Professor Kroll kept the metal drive sealed, untouched, buried beneath layers of protection. But every now and then he would open the letter Keanu gave him and read just one line. "Don't chase the E. Stars become the space between them." And somewhere, far from the spotlight, a man who once held the world in his mind now held only a quiet smile. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. He had walked into the heart of brilliance and walked out still whole.